Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining. I wanted to set a couple bit of ground rules and then give the floor to our panelists to do some introductions. So as you guys are coming in, that's great. If you can remain muted while we go through these questions, that's awesome. If you need to hop off at any point, totally fine. We want this to be as organic of a conversation as possible. So feel free to come in and come out as your schedule allows. As Paula said, we'll obviously share out the recording of the Zoom meeting afterwards, and as well as this Miro board, which can kind of be a living, breathing document for all the things that we go through today. If your question gets called, again, put it into the Zoom chat. If you want to unmute yourself and give it extra context, we'd love to hear a little bit more. But our panelists will just kind of be going through, one by one and kind of answering any questions that they can and providing value. Quick intro for me, I am Alexa. I work at Crema. We're a digital product agency headquartered in Kansas City, although I've been working full-time remote from Phoenix for the last 18 months. We're huge fans of Miro. It helps us do almost every meeting that we can come across as we're building software for our clients and internal teams. So we thank them for the collaboration here and look forward to creating more content together. So with that, I'm going to pass the buck. I'll actually send it over to Michael, who I'm lucky enough to work with. He's one of our panelists today. And if you want to move that down the line, Michael, it'd be great to hear from you, your experience working remote, your current role, and just a little fun icebreaker. If there's thinking of food and working remotely, if there's something that you love to have around, or you love it so much that you don't want it around, I'd love to hear that too.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. So, hey everyone, my name is Michael. As Alexa mentioned, I work with Alexa and have had the pleasure to do so for the last probably 4 years now. We actually both used to work at the main Kansas City office for Crema before we both went fully remote and have been for about the last year and a half. My experience is primarily in product management for about the last 6.5 years at Crema. Recently transitioned into taking that experience to use it as an agile coach. And as far as my kind of terrible food to have when working remote, I would say it's an open bag of chips. I can't control myself with that.
You're not alone. Thanks, Michael. All right, next panelist, Justin. He joins us from the Infinite Red team over there. I think you're in Portland, Oregon, outside of there.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Justin Husky. I'm the head of design for Infinite Red. We are a fully remote design and development consultancy. We work with clients kind of all over the US and globally. And I would say that something I've learned lately is that Oreos have been kind of my go-to for stress eating lately. So every time there is a supply run to the store, there's definitely a couple of bags of those in there. So
love it. Who doesn't live in Oreo?
Right.
Great. Thank you. Next panelist, we have Jonathan joining us. He's the CEO and co-founder of Turing. Jonathan, do you want to give us a little bit more information about you? You might be muted. So sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
There we go. Yes.
Okay. Hi, Alexa. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Siddharth, CEO of Turing. So we help companies hire pre-vetted remote engineers for front-end, full-stack, back-end, AI, data science. So we built this platform where we automatically find and evaluate the world's best engineers so that you can push a button and hire them remotely. And when we started the company, we didn't think that all hiring would become remote hiring in situations like this. So I like to eat ginger snaps and very unhealthy pizza when I'm working at home.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. And then last up for our panelists, we have Wykit. He is the CEO of RemoteHQ, and I'll let him give a little bit more context into his role.
Thanks, guys, for having me. At RemoteHQ, we build remote collaboration software for distributed teams. So think of it as a virtual office, right? So all the things that you can do in a physical office, be it taking notes together, sitting next to each other, looking over a website or a document, whiteboarding. We have an integration with Miro, for example, and audio recording, screen recording, and a lot of other things. We essentially encapsulate all those ways you work together in the physical office onto our platform. It's all web-based, no download. So it feels a bit like a virtual office, if you will. Our team has been fully remote from day one around the world. So we feel like for a lot of people, there's a bit of an adjustment. And one tip we've learned as a remote team, when we want to build culture or want to kill some boredom if you're working long hours, is we spin up 80s arcade games on one of our features, which is a shared browser, a virtual browser in the cloud, and we just spin up any arcade game on the web and we play together. And we have leaderboard and competition. So that's how we keep we build a lot of culture. So remotely.
I love that. Which game is your
Galaga?
One?
Galaga.
Oh, awesome. That's great. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And to the panelists, I appreciate you guys taking the time. Even as remote experts, there's probably still some uncertainties with the environment we find ourselves in. So I appreciate the flexibility in joining us today and sharing your wisdom. So I'm going to kick off with our first question. I see a couple coming in the chat. But to get the conversation started, we'll do this number one question we see here in the Miro board. And that is, even as an expert in remote work, what's a big recurring challenge that you encounter? And I'll let you guys kind of pick off that if you would like to.
Yeah, I can go. So one big challenge for those of us building companies as distributed teams and in remote work is communication and staying aligned on what the company's priorities are at any point in time. Of course, for a startup, that is extremely important. And when you are in a distributed team, this is sometimes a big challenge. And the way we address that at Turing is we have company-wide OKRs that are at the level of a month, which we share across the company. And we have weekly asynchronous syncs where we track everyone's progress against those OKRs. And these are all shared on Slack widely across the company. We then have, most of our teams follow an agile process. So with daily stand-ups, 2-week sprints. So everyone's always sharing with each other what the diff is between yesterday and today. What changed between yesterday and today? Maybe somebody initially thought this feature would take a week to build, and maybe now it's 2 weeks and something has changed. So you need to make sure that the feedback loop is set quickly so that you quickly know that. So daily stand-ups, 2-week sprints, publishing OKRs. We also publish the org chart every month. Here are all the different groups in the company. Here's who's leading those teams, who's reporting to whom, and what are the interconnections between those groups. You kind of have to visually paint out the map of your company and share it widely. And it's funny, like you might think like all of these are good things to do even when you are local, centralized in one office. And that's true. But when you're working from an office, I think people bump into each other more, and there's just a lot more unplanned chatter that happens that fixes some of these communication gaps. And when you're remote, our biggest fear is that this person is going to be isolated in that one Slack channel or that one Slack DM thread, and they're not going to develop that peripheral vision to see, here are all these other teams, and here's how their work connects with me. Here's how I can help this other group. And you don't know what you don't know, right? And so we over communicate things like these org charts, company-wide project maps to show how different projects connect with each other. And you just have to repeat some of the stuff. You have to be like, if your company has one goal, for us, we have one metric that we care about. We have to have more customers start this month than the month prior. And repetition is also key, like in terms of reinforcing those values.
Yeah, that's great. I can confirm that over communication is key, because I've found that even though one-on-one communication, or like maybe we sync up on a quick Slack call, is great, if not everybody shares that information, it can cause some downstream issues. So those were some great tips, and Hollis is doing an awesome job kind of capturing those high level takeaways for everybody who might be tuning in. I do want to get to the second question because there's a lot of good stuff coming in on the Zoom chat. Again, continue to drop those in there. But if one of the other panelists wants to answer the question of keeping teams connected, how have you found are good ways to just maintain that connection between a distributed team, a remote team? Any tips or tricks that the other panelists would like to share?
Sure. We actually, at Infinite Red, we focus a lot on this. It's actually something that we focus on more almost than anything else. Because one of the main challenges we have is that people have been working at home by themselves for several years. And so one of the things we want to do is make sure that they kind of still have some socializing with coworkers. And so we have a few different things to try to bring about that kind of water cooler conversation stuff. One thing we actually do is we have a Zoom room called a kitchen table that a lot of people in our company use. And all that actually is just a bunch of us getting on Zoom, working together, and it kind of replicates that feeling of like you hear somebody typing on a keyboard in the background. And a lot of like quick conversations and ideas kind of get sparked from that. And in addition to that, we do a lot of things like holiday parties and stuff. We use like Chrome plugins to be able to hook up on Netflix and watch holiday movies. And we have all sorts of different things that try to bring people together, make them feel connected, and that they feel like they have like a friendly vibe with the company. In fact, in about 2 hours, we're all going to be having a team lunch on Zoom where we're just going to get together, have lunch, and it could be painful, awkward silence. We'll find out, but at least we're all hanging out, attempting to connect with one another.
That's great. I actually did see someone asked around holiday parties if you attempt them as a remote company, and it's good to hear that you do. And I think there's maybe some more creative ways to think about that. I did see too that there's a Netflix Chrome extension where you can kind of watch shows and movies together and have a live chat. So there's maybe a few more things that we can drop into the Miro board afterwards to give people some other ideas. Michael Whitekit, do you have any other suggestions here on how to keep the team feeling connected while remote?
Yeah, we what we try to do is even though we're 100% remote, we feel like we try not to be too religious about it, right? In the sense that there are things that remote's really good at. There are things that just being in person once in a while is really good at. So what we do is twice a year, by not having offices, all the rent that we save, we hunt for cheap deals twice a year to do offsites. So we fly everyone around the world. We've done Iceland, we've done Malaysia, we've done San Diego. So every 6 months we do that. And just a recognition that, nothing can quite replace pizza and beer time. So we do a 1 week long offsite. It's a mixture of planning and a mixture of just hanging out and getting to know each other. So it's worked really well. We've been doing it for about 1.5 years now. We've kind of tweaked the format a little bit, but people seem to like it. And then the next thing I'll say is that obviously this may not be scalable. So we have some ideas that, if we ever get to a point where we are 100, 200, a few hundred people, we obviously won't fly everyone to a location. So ideas that we've had include, we'll book an Airbnb every 2 months in a city that might fit 15 people. It's first come, first serve. Whoever signs up, we'll fly you there and you have a slot. So anyway, that does work well.
That's great. Michael, anything to add?
Yeah. So at Crema, one of the things that sets us a little bit different is that we are not a 100% remote company, except for right now, like everyone. So that does bring a unique set of opportunities in terms of like figuring out like how does folks like Alexa and I socialize maybe with some team members who are working together in person. And one of the things that we've actually found out that works really well is if the people who are like, say, going to a happy hour in person, bring along an iPad connected to the bar's Wi-Fi or a cellular network, we're able to actually remote in, set our Zoom virtual backgrounds to an appropriate bar image or scene for to have some fun like that. Grab a beer out of our fridge and join them and socialize that way. I've done it a few times myself, and it actually works really well to build that camaraderie when you have a partially distributed team. One other thing that I think could be super awesome for everyone to check out is this Slack app called Donut. We recently started using it at Crema as a means to automatically introduce people who don't necessarily get a chance to work together on a day-to-day basis. And it uses Slackbot integration to automatically facilitate icebreaker challenges and then setting up meetings, virtual Zoom meetings, so you can grab coffee or tea or whatnot with a coworker you've never really had a chance to talk to.
Yeah, that's great. I can confirm Michael's also joined, we had an improv class at the office a couple years ago, and he joined remotely, which was just like tip of my hat to you, Michael. That was great.
That was fun. That was fun.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to keep moving through. I see some more questions coming in on the chat. So Hollis, bear with me. I know you're still organizing those thoughts from the last question. I'm particularly interested in Wykit and Jonathan's answers to this question. But the question is, do you feel like working remotely promotes more fairness in hiring and promotions?
Wykit, would you like, shall I go?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think so because, so at Turing, for example, we see some amazing people. Like today, Turing has like about 140,000 developers signed up from all over the world. And they come from 10,000 cities, Alexa. They come from 10,000 cities. And a lot of these cities you would not have heard of. And when we look at their resumes, they don't have colleges that you would recognize, any kind of work, other companies that they've worked at that you'd recognize. But because we test them on their ability to code, and we test them on computer science foundations and specific technologies, I guess it's like we're reaching a stage where, at least with software hiring, I think LinkedIn has next to no signal, very little signal. It's just about people talking about what they did versus what they actually know. Like we see some amazingly talented developers from all over the world, and with the right structure. I mean, to be fair, at Turing, like one thing we communicate with our customers is, hey, here's an engineer. Granted, you may not recognize where she went to school or where she worked, but here is our assessment in terms of how she did it in Python, her experience building web apps, machine learning systems. And I think maybe it's bigger than remote work, but we're definitely reaching a state where there is more fairness. And it's like in these cases, our customers don't see the faces of people, don't know their names, there's very little forms of bias. It's literally like just letting your code speak and letting your work speak. And I think a company that is even thinking about going remote is already a company that is devoid of certain biases. I mean, if you're a company that is thinking that they can only hire great people in Palo Alto or the San Francisco Bay Area is living in the past, right? And those companies will lose in the long term against companies that want to hire the best people wherever they are on the planet, whatever they look like, whatever backgrounds they have, but they just want quality.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like what you said about just giving people the opportunity to let the code speak for themselves. It kind of evens the playing field. I'm really encouraged by that answer. Is there any other comments the panelists would like to add to this question around fairness and promotion?
Yeah, I think we definitely see similar. I think we talk to the way we kind of filter for folks that we hire is that we ideally want someone who has actually done remote work before and that's really been socialized to that, because we find that sometimes people think that they can do remote work, but they just need the social touch, and that's totally fine as long as we get them a co-working space. But one thing that we hear when we interview these candidates, almost always, if they've done remote work and they are set up in such a situation that there's a mothership somewhere and they are remote, they feel like second-class citizens, right? So it goes back to not just fairness, but I think also how information gets dispersed, whether they feel included in various companies' activities and the like. And a number of these folks, they, will tell us that, we'll rather, instead of being the lone 10%, 20% that's remote and 80%, the mothership, this kind of setup, I'm looking more for companies that are either entirely remote or mostly remote so that I can be part of the majority. So this whole idea of first class and second class citizens, it's real.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Anything else? Was that you, Michael? Oh, sorry.
And one final comment. And for companies that are that want to create a fair environment where remote workers are not second-class citizens on the team, and that that everyone is treated the same, I'd recommend check out Wikit's company RemoteHQ, which is this really cool virtual office. I think tools like that also sort of level the playing field, even internally at the company, so local employees don't get any kind of unfair treatment. Yeah,
that's great. I've heard and even experienced, as more of our team has gone remote, it also forces things to be documented in a new way and things to be more formalized. And I think that has broader implications in a positive way on the company. Obviously, this looks a little bit different if you start remote, to begin with. But I have seen people kind of step up in their roles to say, hey, we've got people remote now and we need to document and formalize these processes. And it's been a really big benefit and has downstream benefits. I do want to get to the next question here. Michael wrote in and said, as a grad student in software development, my school is going to be online for at least the next month. I've historically not done very well with online only courses. What are some techniques do you think would transfer well to the education space? So kind of drawing the link between online courses and working remotely.
Well, I guess I could go, or we could sit in silence, I guess. So we've had a few people who have contacted us through internships and stuff like that. I don't have a ton of knowledge in the education space online, unfortunately, so kind of try to keep it short. But one thing that I know from friends and colleagues and stuff is that just establishing routine around it helps a lot. In fact, we do this when we're working as well, which is to establish just a routine of getting up and making sure you're ready as if you were kind of going on that commute or whatever to get to where you're going. You've probably seen a lot of the memes going around about the commute of the person now, like, standing at the shower pole, holding it like he's on a subway. If that works, please do it. But routine seems to be the thing that helps the most to stay focused and still feel like you're doing that kind of experience.
And I think also forming study groups is helpful. Go ahead, Hollis.
Oh, I was just going to quickly say, hey, Michael, I might be the most recent student here. So I actually started at Miro when I was a student, and I just graduated last year from Stanford, which has now gone fully remote. And so I would say being part of a remote workforce while I was also a student, and kind of bridging the gap between being a student and experiencing what it means to engage with people and learn kind of in real time in person, and also learning on the job when the job was remote. I think what I found, if anything, I adopted great habits as a student because of my remote work job. And I think part of that was the documentation aspect and the enforcing, I think, sort of what you had just said, Justin, like really being careful about how you're creating boundaries and structure around how you're learning and how you're working. And as students, like, I think you're studying all the time and all of that, but I think if you can create, for me, I was working on Miro and on Miro boards. And so it was like, when I came into Miro as my like online space to work, it was like this trigger, right, of like habit of like, all right, now I'm on and now I'm working. Or it caused me to, talk with professors more and all of that too. Because I think there's that communication piece with it. So I think as you're seeing classes move onto Zoom, I think creating opportunities beyond just like in the classroom chatting with professors on Zoom to also then create the formal time to stay on Zoom for office hours, or to suggest that, or to create time, as it's like, as Justin was saying, of make a study group, be on Zoom with your classmates, not just when you're in class on Zoom, but to create kind of those extra times where it's the over communication time. It's the chit-chatting over ideas and kind of mulling over ideas together. So as a student that like has done that, that's what I would say.
Great, thanks, Hollis. All right, looking at the time, I want to make sure that we get to a few more questions. They're coming in. So George, oh, hi, George. I work with George and for him. He's asking a great question here around managing sentiment on your team. So as a team's distributed, the question is, how do you measure how people are feeling day in and day out? And I know in the beginning, when we talked about some ongoing, challenges with remote work, one of those ways to combat it is daily stand-ups, and just making sure that people are over communicating. But are there any other tips you guys have just to make sure that people are expressing their feelings and being given the opportunity to do so? I don't know if there's any strategies we can share here. So one of the things we've done, I'll just chime in, as the growth team at Crema is basically our marketing and sales team. And we do bi-weekly sprints. And one of the things we do in our retrospectives is a little sentiment analysis, or we'll pull up a feelings wheel. And I know that sounds a little touchy-feely, because it is, but really making the space for people to name how they're feeling and talk through it has been really helpful, to make sure that people are given space to do so. I think oftentimes they might feel like they need to be more optimistic than they might feel. And so we want to give them the opportunity to really explain how they're feeling and name those emotions. Michael, Whitekit, do you guys have any other suggestions on how to measure sentiment on a team?
Yeah, so this is actually a bit of a problem for us. So, and we eat our own dog food on our platform. So we ended up building emojis in our platform. So when people are doing synchronous collaboration, instead of cutting in, people can hear a lot of emoji, and the thumbs up keeps on coming up. So that means that we are vehemently in agreement. But the larger thing we realize is every time we feel like we've done something that we shouldn't have done, or sort of we need to optimize our workflow or team norms and things like that, we feel like always going back to being explicit about norms help a lot. And we didn't really have to do that in our old companies when we weren't remote. And so that's one of the big change that we had to learn how to deal with, which is things that we take for granted a little bit, being in the same physical location, just because you spend so much time physically and there's all this like random collisions on hallways and things like that. You can actually build a lot of norms in a very implicit way. But here we feel like we have to be very explicit, one thing, about here's how we should. I think this goes back to something that Jonathan mentioned, and some of you mentioned as well, just process, being very explicit about, if you feel this way, this is what you ought to do. And sometimes we try to strike a balance of not being over processed, and we're conscious of that. But yeah, that, ultimately I think remote is the problem we always find is, we build tools to enable remote work, but ultimately it's not a technical problem. A lot of it is it's a social problem, or it's a social issues that we try to, technology can't really solve it, and we really need to talk around it and need to be mindful of the dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just to add to that as well, one of the things I make sure to do on at least a biweekly basis outside of full team meetings is the people that I work with just have brief, like 5 to 10 minute one-on-one calls that just starts with like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? There's so much that can come from that you can just kind of start peeling on, that gets down to the practical solutions that we face every day in our jobs.
Yeah, and I'd say too, like as an employee, one thing that one of my bosses here, Jamin, actually will do, he mentioned it in chat, is about once a week he'll send out, what's your stress level on a 0 to 10, and that actually helps me self-evaluate and see where I'm at. On top of that, our CEO is constantly going into direct messages and just saying good morning to people and ask how they're doing, which helps a lot. Actually, I want to give a shout out to the Infinite Red team, because pretty much almost most of the companies here in this chat. So it's nice to have the support, and it's cool to see all your faces.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, to add to Michael's point, how are you feeling in a one-on-one, and pausing unlocks so much useful information. Like if we're done right, that's a super important question to ask. One other thing that I try to do is to is every week we have this thing called we have a 30-minute collective Zoom where we do what we call our celebrating wins, where everyone in the team thanks somebody else for their contribution to making the company successful that week. And it's really cool. It puts everybody in a nice positive frame of mind. Okay, this person helped here, this person helped there. And to me, it surfaces also a lot of hidden contributions people are making that otherwise would be invisible to me. And it always also actively influences the sentiment of the team. Like people always come out of it recharged, positive. And the team also gets a little bit closer together.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, highlighting wins, even if they don't feel like huge milestones or big releases, I find those little incremental successes are really important to recognize and acknowledge, and it gives people, a feeling of my work matters. And I love that suggestion. So, Hollis, great job capturing all these ideas. I'm going to move on to the next question. I know there's a lot more coming in. So again, we will try to pull the ones we don't address today on the call into the Miro board and follow up later on with some more written resources. The next question I want to pose to the panelists is tools. So the question is, what are some best practices for using different kinds of communication channels? Video chat, phone call, email, instant message. How do you balance all those different methods of communication when working with a remote team or team member? Any tips there?
I mean, I'll go. I'm a tool nerd as much as it gets, and I will say truly and transparently, for the last year, Miro has been the first tool that I've gone to in terms of recommendations for the best communication channels. The reason for that is because not only is it great at supporting synchronous discussions, just like this one right now, but it's also been incredibly valuable for supporting really productive asynchronous discussions. In fact, actually, just over the last few weeks, there's been a recurring design collaboration meeting that I've facilitated for some time. And just due to the nature of the work, we thought, well, what if we continue this discussion outside the meeting using a Miro board, doing wireframing, dropping images in there, commenting and everything. And it's worked. The results of it have been fantastic. One other quick tip is also when you're using Zoom and you're in a spot like your home where you don't necessarily want to have the background visible, you can use a virtual background as well, something that's more specific to the location where you're working from, or maybe something that's more what your traditional day-to-day office life is like.
That's great. Thanks, Michael. Justin, Wykit, Jonathan, any other tips on when to choose chat over a video call, for example?
So in terms of, it's good to think in terms of how transitive a piece of communication is. Meaning, if both of us have a chat on the phone, our team members don't really see it. There's no sort of collective institutional knowledge being built. So we like to start ideally from something that is a Notion document or even a Google Doc. We like to have conversations happen around there, so state is captured effectively. And when that's not possible, we would have like a public channel that is segmented by topic or team, so that at least other people know that a certain conversation is going. And we try to avoid things like DMs and phone calls to the absolute minimum. Video calls are okay, but the challenge is that it's not indexed and not searchable and not that easily shareable. It's kind of poof, it's gone after that 1 hour. Like you walked away with some takeaways and that's it. It's a very lossy form of information exchange. And so we try to be intentional about that. In our team, honestly, we get a lot of mileage out of just Google Docs with people commenting on the doc. Like before a meeting, for example, like somebody would send, let's say, a document with a pre-read with updates that they want to discuss or make a decision on. And most of us would have discussed this and shared comments ahead of time. So the meeting itself is very efficient, and it's only there to have maybe quick back and forths or brainstorms. So generally trying to be more async and more, generally being more async where the knowledge and where the knowledge is also captured and publicly shareable.
That's great. Thank you.
I think that's interesting. We're actually, I think, a little bit on the other side where we're a little bit more in video, just because as humans, we want to see kind of facial expressions and body language and stuff like that. And so I think we actually, kind of our communication boils down to Slack and Zoom. And we're in Zoom a lot doing video chats, and we will take like notes and stuff like that. But I noticed with our communication, it's just a lot of it with the creative problem solving we're doing is having that face to face and being able to see how people are reacting to things and bringing kind of that human element into remote work.
That's great. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Thank you all for writing in. I was just scrolling through the chat and it's been great. So some things have been answered in writing. And again, we'll pull in anything else that we don't get to into the Miro board. And Hollis is a magician at pulling all these things together. Great work. Okay, so last question is, I'm trying to pick which one, to be honest. Okay, do you believe, John Kohler writes this, it's a work-life balance question. Do you believe that working remotely has increased the amount of hours that you spend doing work? And do you feel more productive? And the real question here is like, how do you call it at the end of a day? You know, how do you draw that line in the sand if you're kind of living and working in the same space? What are some tips to make sure that you're signing off and checking out and separating the two? Any tips you can share?
That's a really, really good question. Because I think for me, counterintuitively, I don't find myself working more time, but I do find myself often falling into the trap of working more intensely for the same amount of time. And when you do that, you put your energy levels at risk and your ability to focus and support your team in the following days. So I think more than anything, remote work, if done correctly in terms of like some of the earlier things we talked about, like planning your schedule, setting guidelines, things like that, having a routine, you also need to monitor your own energy levels and make sure that you're not giving it too much, but of course not giving it too little either.
Yeah, I find myself and my team, I've actually had conversations with my team. We feel like we end up working more hours just because sometimes the markers, you know, like start of the day, end of the day, lunch isn't really there. I think definitely more true for my team members who are either single or without kids. For myself, I have 2 young kids, so they act as markers for me when they come back and they're rambunctious and I just can't work, right? So that's when, that's my cue to stop.
Yeah, I definitely find myself working more as well. And for me, I find it challenging to switch out from work. That's kind of what my challenge is when I'm working from home. I don't have as good markers. So I find that with remote work, like one thing that gets a little bit challenging is the day doesn't really stop. Like it stops. I go from my home office to the rest of the house, but my brain is still sort of in a little bit in work mode. So I think you kind of need, so I need to get better at that.
Well, all 3 of my bosses are here, so of course I'm working more, just so you all know. But no, really, we actually, to the credit of the culture they built, one of the things we do is remind people to put on Do Not Disturb, for example, at 4 o'clock on Friday, so that they know that we're not going to bother them. We put lifestyle and you know, the personal lives of employees first. And so we actually actively encourage them to be in Do Not Disturb and enjoy family time and take advantage of the things that makes us remote. And I would say that, yes, I definitely work a lot, but I feel, since going from office to remote 6 years ago, I've actually developed more of a work-life balance with the way we've set it up. So honestly, probably a little less work than I usually did in the office, but for a good reason.
Right. Well, yeah, and you learn to work smarter, not harder, and it's maybe easier to do when you have less distractions around. But I appreciate the honesty. For me, it's a moving target. There's some days where I'm like, yes, I'm done, and I'm not going to think about it. And there's other days where it's really hard to let go, and I can just like look over and see my computer and want to keep going on something. But that's where I think holding yourself accountable and your team accountable to what really matters goes a long way. So I try to kind of check myself on a daily basis to make sure that we're, I'm focused on the right things and I don't overdo it. Because as Michael mentioned, you can work really intensely, but you can also burn out faster, if that's the only thing that you're focusing on. So it's just good to take care of yourself. I also saw someone in the chat recommend using humor and like be a good person, and just like, it's weird when you have to do your written, like your joke content in a written format sometimes, but like share funny videos, find those people in your company that you can, have the same sense of humor with, and just make sure you're building those connections. And that doesn't have anything to do with this question in particular. I was just looking over to the chat and that caught my eye, and I want to make sure that, you're leaving space for humor in the day-to-day.
Oh, totally. Yeah. We actually have Kent at our company. He started a stock photo channel where you go find the craziest stock photos you can, drop them
Amazing.
in. It's a dark hole of the web, that's for sure.
That's the dark hole.
And
that
you
we
caption
need.
it?
Yes, captions too.
That's perfect. All right. Well, any other burning questions that we want to get to, or I guess panelists, anything else you want to make sure that you communicate before we wrap up today's webinar?
I just wanted to say, I love this board. I mean, we don't use Miro today, but I think maybe for things like the org charts and connecting different projects and teams in the company together, this is great. We use like a really old school, clunky sort of like a Google Doc with some ugly art, like ugly sort of flow charts in it. Like this is great. I really like this. I think tools like these are super helpful for collaboration and capturing state. I mean, I feel like this could be useful for sharing org charts, how different teams connect with each other, and even maybe OKRs. Although for OKRs, I probably prefer spreadsheets.
Yeah, just to wrap up here and to comment on that, we're going to be sharing this out. We're actually creating a wiki right now. So beyond just the notes here from our AMA today, which I'll share. And if you have any other questions, you can just use the comment tool like this. And then you can just say like @board, and everybody will be notified like, how do I, whatever you ask. And so then we can answer after the fact. And then there's also on this board, you can have multiple formats. So you can upload Google Docs on here, you can upload videos. So we like to use it personally. I personally use it as a content hub. I just drop all of my stuff here. So I have one place where everything lives. So we've got a lot of blog posts, videos, etc., and all of these experts share some of their resources as well. So you have one place to go for your remote work questions. So anyway, thank you all for joining. This was a fun experiment. We're going to be hosting another one, kind of one every week for the next 5 weeks with different themes. One will be on hiring next week. Next week is one on running virtual events, actually. But we want this to be interactive, so feel free to join next time, chit chat with us. We'll be here. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.